The name flashing on my phone screen felt like a ghost. 15 years of absolute silence, shattered by a single vibration. I almost let it go to voicemail. Upstairs, my wife, Elara, the poor nobody they'd cast me out for, was asleep. The same woman whose face was now plastered across every financial news site. The Forbes list had dropped this morning. My thumb hovered over the decline button before a morbid curiosity took over. I answered. "Ethan, darling." My mother's voice was sickly sweet, a tone I hadn't heard since I was a boy. "I saw the news about your Elara. We need to talk. Your father and I have missed you terribly." The lie was so blatant, it almost made me laugh. "Missed me terribly?" The words echoed in my head. "The Vances don't miss people, they miss assets." My father, Richard, preached that a man's worth was his net worth. My sister, Isabel, was his perfect disciple, marrying a man whose only virtue was a century-old banking fortune. They were curators of a dynasty, and I was the painting they'd thrown out for having the wrong frame. Their ultimatum 15 years ago was delivered by their lawyer, not even in person. "Choose her, and you are no longer a Vance." I chose Elara, and for 15 years I hadn't existed to them. Now, suddenly, I was a person of interest again. Or rather, Elara was. She wasn't a nobody anymore. She was a strategic acquisition, an asset they desperately wanted back on the family's balance sheet. I leaned against the cool glass of my office window, looking out over the San Francisco skyline. "What do you want, Mother?" I asked, my voice flat and cold. "And let's skip the pleasantries. We both know you didn't call to ask about my day." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a faint rustle of silk. It was the same sound her dress made the night I brought Elara to meet them. That was the beginning of the end. I met Elara in a 24-hour coffee shop in Palo Alto. I was a junior associate at my father's firm, miserable and drowning in spreadsheets. She was a coder, living on ramen and caffeine, building something in a language I didn't understand on a laptop held together by duct tape. She had this fire in her eyes, a belief that she could build a better world with ones and zeros. To me, she was a better world. My family saw something else. At the mandatory Sunday dinner, my father Richard barely looked at her, instead directing his questions at me. "What's her family name?" he'd asked, as if inquiring about a stock's lineage. Isabel, my sister, had smirked. "I'm sure her parents are very hard-working." She'd said the word hard-working, dripping with condescension. Elara, bless her, was unfazed. She tried to engage them, talking about her vision for decentralized data. My father cut her off. "We deal in tangible assets, young lady, not digital fantasies." The dismissal was absolute. They didn't see a brilliant mind. They saw a liability. A girl with no pedigree, no trust fund, no value to add to the Vance portfolio. She was a smudge on their perfect family portrait. The final break came a month later. Not a call, not a meeting. A courier-delivered envelope with the Vance family crest embossed in gold. Inside, a single page from my father's attorney. "A final distribution from your trust," it read, "a check for a paltry sum attached. Acceptance of these funds constitutes your formal severance from the Vance family and all associated interests. The choice is yours." It wasn't a choice. It was an execution. I remember staring at that check. It was enough to live on for a few months, a final insult designed to look like generosity. I tore it in half. That night, I moved into Elara's tiny apartment. We had nothing but her beat-up laptop and a shared dream. They thought they were cutting out a cancer. They had no idea they were cutting loose the only part of their legacy that would ever actually build something new. And now, after 15 years of watching us build from the ashes they left us in, they wanted back in. "We want to celebrate," my mother finally said, her voice regaining its familiar, condescending poise. "Your father wants to host a dinner. For you and Elara. A proper family welcome." "A welcome?" 15 years late? I almost choked on the word. A celebration of what exactly? The fact that her digital fantasy is now worth more than the entire Vance portfolio? Don't be crass, Ethan, she snapped, the sugar coating evaporating instantly. This is about legacy. Elara has built something remarkable. It's only right that it be brought under the family umbrella. Your father has a proposal. A merger of interests, you could say. A merger, of course. They weren't welcoming a daughter-in-law. They were initiating a hostile takeover of my life. They wanted to absorb Elara's success, stamp the Vance name on it, and pretend they'd orchestrated it all along. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was breathtaking. Fine, I said. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. A palpable sigh of relief whispered through the phone. Wonderful. Your father will be so pleased. Sunday dinner, just like old times. No, I cut her off. Not your house, not your terms. You'll come to us. Friday. My office at Summit Ridge, 5 o'clock. You, father, and Isabel. If you want to talk business, we'll do it in a boardroom. The silence that followed was far more honest than her greeting. I had seized control, and she knew it. Very well, she said, her voice clipped. We'll be there. I ended the call without another word and stood there in the dark, the city lights blurring through the glass. The rage I'd expected to feel was absent, replaced by an icy calm. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a negotiation. And they had just walked into it with the weakest position imaginable. I went upstairs. The bedroom was dimly lit, and Elara was sitting up in bed, her laptop open. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. I heard the phone, she said softly. I figured it was only a matter of time. I sat on the edge of the bed. They want a merger of interests. They want to welcome you into the family. A small, humorless smile touched her lips. 15 years of R&D, and now they want to acquire the finished product. Classic venture capital move. Only they have no capital I need. She closed the laptop. What did you tell them? I told them to come to my office on Friday. Her eyes, the same ones that held that fiery belief in the coffee shop all those years ago, met mine. They weren't hurt or angry. They were sharp, analytical. Good, she said, her voice firm. They broke you away from the family to protect their assets. It's only fair we invite them back to protect ours. She knew exactly what this was. Not a reconciliation. An audit. A final closing of the books on an investment that had, for them, gone catastrophically wrong. They thought they were coming to make a deal. They had no idea they were coming to face a board of two that had already decided their fate. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about writing the last chapter ourselves, in ink they couldn't buy. They'll expect a negotiation, I said. Elara's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, they'll get one, she replied. They just won't like the terms of the acquisition. The next 2 days passed with a strange, unnerving quiet. It wasn't the silence of dread, but the focused calm before a final presentation. At Summit Ridge, my world was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the bay. I moved through board meetings and pitch decks with practiced precision. I spent my days dissecting companies, judging founders on their grit and vision. The irony was thick enough to taste. I was now preparing to dissect my own creators with the same dispassionate eye. On Thursday night, I found Elara not in her home office but in the garage, standing before the ghost of her first server rack. It was a Frankenstein's monster of mismatched parts we'd salvaged from electronics dumps, the machine that had run the first 1,000 lines of her code. It was the only relic of our past we'd kept. She ran a hand over a dusty casing. Remember when the power supply blew and we spent our last $80 on a new one instead of groceries? We ate cereal for a week, I said, standing beside her. Best investment we ever made, she replied, her voice soft but absolute. She turned to me, her eyes clear. They don't know this part of the story, Ethan. They can't. To them, success is an inheritance. They don't understand that our real net worth isn't on the Forbes list. It's in this garage. It was forged in ramen and desperation. She was right. The Vances understood assets you could list on a spreadsheet. They would never comprehend that our greatest asset was the 15 years they'd forced us to survive without them. That was a currency they didn't have and couldn't acquire. The next afternoon, an hour before the meeting, my assistant buzzed. "Mr. Vance, your family's lawyer, Mr. Albright, is on the line. He says it's regarding the agenda." I looked at the single file Elara and I had prepared. It was a one-page summary of the Vance family's holdings, a portfolio of stagnant, old money assets bleeding value year over year, a dynasty in decay. "Tell Mr. Albright we don't need his agenda," I said, my voice even. "We have our own." I hung up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of the main boardroom. The stage was set. Polished mahogany, Pellegrino on ice, and a view that stretched to the Golden Gate. It was a room designed for power plays. For 15 years they held all the cards. Now, they were walking into my house, about to find out they were holding a losing hand. This wasn't a family meeting. It was a valuation. And I already knew they were worth nothing. The heavy glass door of the boardroom swung open precisely at 5. They entered as a unit, a phalanx of old money marching into hostile territory. My father, Richard, led the charge, his suit impeccably tailored, his face a mask of stern patrician authority. My mother, Catherine, followed, her silk dress rustling with that same familiar sound, a strained smile plastered on her face. Bringing up the rear was my sister, Isabel, looking like a vulture circling a potential meal, her eyes darting around the room, assessing its value. Elara and I remained seated at the head of the vast mahogany table. We didn't stand. We didn't offer a greeting. We simply watched them choose their seats on the opposite side, creating a perfect battlefield tableau. My father cleared his throat, placing a leather-bound folio on the table. "Ethan, Elara, thank you for making the time. I know we've had our distance, but blood is blood. We're here to rectify that. We're here to build a bridge." He slid the folio across the table. It stopped inches from my hand. I didn't touch it. "This is a proposal," he continued, his voice resonating with the boardroom boom he used to intimidate junior partners. "A blueprint for consolidating our family's future. We propose folding Elara's company, Nexus, into a new Vance family trust. I would take a senior advisory role, of course, guiding its strategic growth. We'll give you both majority seats on the board. It's a generous offer. It brings everything back where it belongs." "Under one name," Isabel smirked. "Think of it, Ethan. The power of the Vance name combined with this." She gestured vaguely at the skyline behind me. "It's what's best for everyone." The sheer audacity of it hung in the air. They weren't building a bridge. They were demanding a key to a vault we had built, filled, and secured ourselves. I let the silence stretch, watching my father's composure begin to fray at the edges. Finally, I leaned forward and pushed his folio back across the table. "We won't be needing that," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the room. "We have our own agenda." I nodded to Elara. With a single keystroke on her tablet, the 80-inch screen behind us flickered to life. It wasn't a welcome message. It was a stark, brutal financial chart. A line in Vance blue, plummeting downwards over a 15-year period. "This," I began, my voice as cold and sharp as the glass tower we were in, "is the Vance portfolio. Since I was formally severed, its value has depreciated by 42%, adjusted for inflation. Your holdings in textiles are nearly worthless. Your real estate is leveraged against debt you can no longer service efficiently. You're not a dynasty. You're a museum, and you've been selling the paintings to keep the lights on." Richard's face went from pale to crimson. "How dare you? You have no right." "I have every right." I cut him off, my voice hardening. "As the managing partner of Summit Ridge, I have access to the best analysts in the world. And as the man you threw away, I have the motivation. You didn't call us for a family reunion. You called because you're drowning." Elara spoke for the first time, her voice calm and measured, each word a perfectly placed stone. "The market values growth, innovation, vision. Your assets represent the opposite. They are a legacy of stagnation. Another keystroke. A new line appeared on the screen, a brilliant electric green that shot upwards like a rocket, dwarfing the pathetic blue line below it. "This is Nexus," she said simply. "This is what you called a digital fantasy. Its current market cap could acquire every asset you have left 17 times over, and still have enough capital for a hostile takeover of your sister's husband's bank." Isabel gasped, her face a mask of fury. My mother looked as if she'd been slapped. "This meeting isn't about a merger," Elara continued, her eyes locked on my father. "A merger implies two entities of value coming together. This is a bailout inquiry. And frankly, you're not a very attractive investment." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Richard looked from the screen to me, his patrician mask crumbling to reveal the desperate man beneath. "What do you want, Ethan?" he rasped. The question, an admission of defeat. This was the moment, the culmination of 15 years of anger, of struggle, of silent grinding work. But looking at them, small, outdated, and terrified, I felt no triumph. Only a vast, empty sense of finality. "Want?" I echoed. "There's nothing you have that I want." "But," Elara interjected, leaning forward with a predatory grace, "we are prepared to make you an offer." They all straightened, a flicker of pathetic hope in their eyes. They still thought this was a negotiation. "We are launching a philanthropic foundation," Elara explained. "Its mission is to fund education for underprivileged students in STEM. A worthy cause, I'm sure you'd agree." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We are willing to acquire the Vance family name for the foundation. We'll purchase the trademark and all associated branding." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "You want to buy our name?" "We'll pay $1 million, Elara said, the figure an insult dressed up as a number. "It's a charitable donation, really. More than its market value. Your family's reputation has been in decline for years. Associating it with our foundation would be rehabilitative. You would, of course, be required to sign a permanent, legally binding non-association agreement. You would no longer be able to use the Vance name in any business or social context. You'd simply be Richard, Catherine, and Isabel." It was a masterstroke. She wasn't just offering to buy an asset, she was offering to erase them. To strip them of the only thing they had ever truly valued. The one thing they believed made them superior. "You are not a Vance," my father seethed, his voice trembling with rage. "You will never be a Vance." I stood up, the movement signaling the end. "You made sure of that 15 years ago, Father, and you have no idea how grateful I am for it." I looked at the three of them, broken and exposed under the harsh lights of my world. "The offer is on the table. You have 24 hours to accept. After that, it's gone." "And so are we." I walked to the door and held it open. They exited not as a unit, but as three separate, defeated individuals. My father's back was ramrod straight, a pathetic attempt to retain a dignity that had been surgically removed. Isabel's face was a mask of reptilian fury, her eyes promising a revenge she no longer had the resources to enact. My mother simply looked shrunken, her hand clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. I watched them go, then slowly closed the heavy glass door. The soft click of the magnetic lock echoed in the silent boardroom, a sound more final than any slammed door of my childhood. Elara came to stand beside me at the window, her presence a silent, solid anchor. We didn't speak, we just watched the lights of the city begin to sparkle across the bay, a galaxy of ambition and creation, a world they no longer had a place in. "It's done," I said, the words feeling hollow in the vast space. "No," she corrected softly, her fingers lacing with mine. "It's balanced." The first crack appeared just after midnight, a call from my mother. Her voice, stripped of its practiced, lilting cadence, was thin and ragged. "Ethan, please," she began, no preamble, no false sweetness. "Your father, he won't come out of his study. He's just sitting in the dark. You can't do this to him, to the family." The manipulation was as reflexive to her as breathing. It was the same tactic she'd used when I'd first wanted to go to college out of state. The same one she'd used to try and dissuade me from marrying Elara. A performance of maternal concern to mask a demand for control. "He has a choice," I said, my voice flat. "The same one he gave me. It's just business, Mother. You taught me that." "This isn't business, this is our name, our history," she cried, her voice breaking. "Your history is a portfolio of depreciating assets," I replied, the words cold and precise. "And your name is the last one you have left to liquidate. You have until 5 o'clock tomorrow." I ended the call before her sobs could begin. I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. Just the profound emptiness that comes after a long overdue amputation. The next day was a study in silence. I went through my meetings at Summit Ridge, my focus absolute. I dissected term sheets and analyzed burn rates, while a clock in the back of my mind ticked down the final hours of the Vance dynasty. There were no more calls. No desperate texts from Isabel. Just the suffocating silence of pride wrestling with utter desperation. I knew my father. He would hold out until the last possible second, clinging to the wreckage of his identity, hoping for a miracle or a sign of weakness from my end. But Elara and I weren't weak. We had been forged in the pressure he had created. We didn't bend. At 4:58 p.m., my assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Albright, on line 1. I looked at Elara, who sat across from my desk. She gave a single, slow nod. I put the call on speaker. "Albright," I said. The lawyer's voice was weary, devoid of its usual bluster. "Ethan, my clients have instructed me to accept your offer." A faint sigh traveled through the line. "The agreements for the transfer of trademark and the non-association covenants will be messengered to you in the morning for your signature." He paused, and for a moment I thought he would say something personal, offer a meaningless apology. Instead, he simply added, "The Vance Trust will of course cover all legal fees." I almost smiled. Even in their final act of surrender, they had to pretend they had some control, some financial authority left. "Don't bother," I said, leaning into the phone. "Send us the invoice for your services. We'll cover it." The silence on the other end was more damning than any protest. I had just paid for their lawyer to formally erase them. It wasn't just a buyout. It was a final, complete acquisition of their defeat. "As you wish," Albright finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. I ended the call and looked at Elara. Her expression was serene. She had built an empire from nothing, while they had squandered a legacy into dust. There was no celebration, no triumphant toast. There was only the quiet, profound justice of the universe balancing its books. They hadn't been destroyed by us. They had simply been outcompeted, rendered obsolete by the very future they had refused to see. Their name, the only thing they thought had value, was now ours. Not to carry on, but to give away to kids who, like Elara, would build a world the Vances could never imagine. The silence that followed the click of the phone was different. It wasn't the heavy, expectant silence of the past 2 days. It was clean. Final, a vacuum where a 15-year burden used to be. I looked at Elara. There was no triumphant smile on her face, no celebratory glint in her eyes. There was only the quiet, steady calm of an equation that had been perfectly solved. "It's done," I repeated, but this time the words didn't feel hollow. They felt solid. "The paperwork will be here in the morning," she said, her voice as practical as ever. She reached across the vast desk and placed her hand on mine. Her touch was warm, grounding me in the glass and steel of our present, not the decaying rot of my past. "What now?" I asked, the question feeling impossibly large. "Now," she said, her gaze shifting to the window, to the sprawling city below, "we build." It wasn't a statement about her company. It was about the foundation, about what we would do with the spoils of this war. The Vance name will now fund kids who are just like I was, kids with duct-taped laptops and ideas that people like your father would call fantasies. We're not erasing the name, Ethan. We're rewriting it. That was the core of it. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is a shallow, bitter drink that poisons the victor. This was a reclamation. We hadn't just taken their name. We had taken the very concept of legacy they held so dear, and were about to forge it into something they could never comprehend. A legacy not of bloodlines and inherited wealth, but of opportunity and earned brilliance. The next morning, the courier arrived. 2 sets of documents bound in crisp legal folders. I signed my name where indicated, my hand perfectly steady. Elara signed hers. On the last page of the agreement, I saw the signatures of Richard, Catherine, and Isabel. Their names, once so imposing on trust documents and embossed letterheads, looked like frail, spidery script, the signatures of ghosts. We hadn't destroyed them. We had simply made them irrelevant. And in their place, 1,000 new futures were about to be funded. That was a victory worth more than any number on the Forbes list. So I have to ask you all, if the family who cut you off for this suddenly came calling again after seeing the news, what would you do?